I know that you have a lot of interest in various kinds of Eastern thought and approaches to these kind of bigger questions, and I'm curious what, if anything, you want to say about that, and what how that interest actually dovetails or informs or is informed by the biology that you've been doing and the philosophy of biology that you've contributed to.
Yes, I think it's been unfortunate that philosophy and science have diverged. I've interacted with some very good philosophers, and they have succeeded over the period of time in which I've interacted with them. Anthony Kenny is one of them, Alan Montefiore another, Charles Taylor another. What they have contributed is, of course, not new discovery that we shouldn't expect of philosophers. It's clarity of thought. And for Fatuma, for example, to write, purpose has no use in science, full stop. It seems to me, without any justification, without any discussion of what it would mean for an organism to be purposive, which I think is largely the anticipatory process of knowing what other organisms are doing and being able, nimble enough and quick enough to react. And I see nothing as a problem in that in science. We now talk of building AI systems that can do that and giving them the intelligence to do it. Why don't we think that it must be characteristic of living organisms? I've come to many of the positions I've come to, Mike, through what I see as important philosophical mistakes made by the reductionists. First of all, for denying there's any other way of looking at a living system, that it must always be through reductionist analysis. And there is no philosophical basis for that. There's certainly no philosophical basis for dismissing the idea that organisms, cells, tissues, organs, and so on, naturally constrain the molecules within them to do what they do. And that doesn't seem to me to be particularly controversial. It must happen. But it is, in essence, also a philosophical point. You cannot have a complex system without levels of interaction. And once you've got levels of interaction, you've got downward as well as upward causation. But there we are. I don't know whether that answers the point, Mike, but I've always been fascinated by some aspects of philosophy since being a student and being introduced by the philosopher Stuart Hampshire many years ago at University College London, where I was a student, who introduced me to Spinoza. Now, Spinoza was the main opponent of Descartes. And that's very interesting because in Descartes, you can see the beginning of the Weissman barrier. He wrote, if I knew what was in that sperm, I would be able to predict the organism. And that is very much the idea that from the DNA, you would automatically predict the organism. Spinoza very clearly said no. It was in a letter that he wrote to the Royal Society in 1663 or 5, I can't remember exactly now. Concipium armus iam si placet, conceive, if you will, a little worm in the blood. This little worm would understand the interactions between the particles of the blood, but he would have absolutely no idea that the function of the blood was to circulate. And it is a statement of the principle of seeing the whole, not just the parts. Now, in those days, of course, a scientist and a philosopher was not a separate person. And I suppose what I am saying is I largely regret that the two have diverged.